can also be seen on the City of Cleveland's council website and from council's Facebook page. In accordance with Ohio's open meeting regulation as amended by Sub-House Bill 197, notice of this committee has been publicly posted. All council members have received the calendar. There is no legislative agenda today. And I can tell you that your face needs to be present for your vote to be counted, but we don't have any votes, so I won't tell you that. With that, let me just give a overview of today's agenda. Today's agenda, there's 2 items. The first is I asked Chief Dumas to keep us apprised of the budget as we move forward during these COVID days, in terms of what does the budget look like, because I think it's important that council be well informed of where we are. So Director Chief Dumas will be doing that. The second part of the meeting is more of a report out on, we had authorized a study on the feasibility of solar power in the city of Cleveland. And when we did it, the study that we discussed focused more on ground cover, and just ironically, the administration did a study at about the same time, where they did an RFP for one for rooftop installations, and Jason will be joining for that. But this is more one of those things that I didn't want to fall off during the COVID time. It was queued up and ready to keep moving forward, but then, life happened. I've spoken with Chairman Casey, as this has a utility function, and he's got a busy agenda, as we know, and just said that we should take it in Finance Committee. So with that, I would like to begin with Chief Dumas. If you could give us an overview of where we're at and what we should expect reasonably for the rest of 2020.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Council President and members of Council. I did have Andre send over to you guys our monthly financial monitoring report through the close of business of August 2020. I'm going to do this in as comprehensive a way as I can, so that you don't have to sit through, what you need to read probably a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So where we are, as the Council President identified, of course, we all know the disclaimers around the pandemic. All the information that I'm sharing with you now is factual as of this period of time, the end of August. And of course, I have some additional update through mid-September that I'll do verbally. But of course, it's only good for today as it relates to projections and estimates, because until we have a handle on what's going to be happening with actually the COVID pandemic, we can't speak much about what happens in our local economy. Our biggest impacts, as you guys already know, is around, of course, income taxes, loss of revenues because of close of businesses. And our biggest impact in the close of businesses, of course, is the hospitality and entertainment sector. We've not had big major corporate losses. We have had some small reductions, but for the most part, our hospitality sector is the hardest hit. And I know some of you follow these things nationally. And if you look nationally, you'll see that our unemployment rate in the hospitality sector is number 12 in the country. So anybody that has a large entertainment venue, sports, concerts, museums, the kinds of things that we have in Cleveland that are so attractive, they're feeling the devastation of this COVID pandemic and the stay-at-home measure and the closed orders that are coming from the state and the federal level. So having said that, just so that you know, we do monitor these on a weekly basis. We try to be as accurate as we possibly can do with our projections, but again, they're completely subject to whatever happens in our local environment, national and international, as it relates to the COVID pandemic. So if you go to the first page of the report, that's our budget to actual, and it's the same format that you get like every month, okay? And so you can see that through the end of August, we'd be about 2/3 through the year. And since our budget is primarily weighted by salaries and wage-driven benefits, it is should be an even exchange. So we're at about 66% of the year by the end of August. And so you can see that we have done some reductions that you're very much aware of. As of March, hiring freezes. We're operating at around 86% of our operating budget while trying to keep safety forces at their normal levels. And of course, safety forces comprise more than 60% of our budget. So we're service delivery. And so without the reductions in safety forces, we don't have huge reductions anyplace else. So by this first page, you can see that we are at about 383.9 million, which is 56% of our budget. And on the expenditure side, we're at 394, which is about 58%. So we're currently at around a $10 million deficit, just budget to actual. You will remember that we started the year with 43 million. And so we're down, our unencumbered cash is about 33 million at this point. If you go to the next page, it just speaks again about our financial overview as it relates to our employee healthcare expenditures. You will remember that we're self-insured, and so we do pay our own claims. We are seeing a larger number of retirements. We are seeing a larger number of use of healthcare benefits because generally when people plan to retire, if they're eligible, they do get the bulk of their healthcare needs out of the way prior to kind of severing from the city. So, but it is trending in the direction that we anticipate, and we should end this year at around the same amount that that we had in 2019. If you go to the next page, that's our unencumbered cash in each one of our major funds. So you can see on this page, we started the year with 43.8 million. And again, at the end of August, if you go down to August, you'll see we're at 33. So we've used about $10 million of our unencumbered cash. We do anticipate that we will be transferring, we received $31 million from the first stimulus package. We put together our first draw. They actually sent the funds to us and we actually have them in an account. We put together our first draw against the funds and we submitted it to the auditor's office and to the funder because I wanted to be sure that what we were asking for, that our understanding of the guidance and all the interaction we've had with the funder, that we do meet all the criteria. And we got back an approval on the first sector. So we will transfer from that 31 million, 12 million into my September activity because we have 3 pays in September. Because the county extended their property tax due date about a month or so out. We were down on our property tax distribution in August through August by about $7 to $9 million. So that money also will come in September and will help to support that third payroll and wage driven expenses. If you look at water from the beginning of the year, 199 million, they're currently at about the same amount. If you look at WPC, 23 million, they're down about 1 to 22 million, 0.6, a little less than 1. CPP started at 26 and they're at 35.4. They've done a lot of cost cutting measures in anticipation of higher cost power. And you guys are going to be getting a presentation that we just finished this week on that on your next utility meeting. So they'll be talking about what the reductions they've done and what their power transmission costs are. Port control is at 80 and they're currently at 95 at the end of the year. Port control also received federal funding, as have all of our airlines. Now, having said all that, in the arena of debt service and refinancing, that market, of course, is very stressed. Everyone is receiving downturns because of the downturn in our economy. They're receiving reductions in their ratings and their outlooks. And of course, our airport is no different than any other and faced with the same kind of issues. And again, you'll hear more about that during your port control hearings, transportation hearing. And again, the next few pages are on overtime, and that's just by pay period. So if you get back to page 6, you'll see the summary. Okay, and so you can see in the Division of Police, and again, the first 2 pages is just by pay period if you wanted to compare by pay period. In the Division of Police, we appropriated, they get the lion's share, the bulk of overtime throughout the budget. Overtime is not allocated, as you well know, throughout the budget in every division or department, just those divisions and departments that historically have needed some overtime. And of course, police is the major one. So they were budgeted in 2020, 14 million. They're currently at 9.3 million. And that's with any overtime that was unanticipated, like protest or any kind of other emergencies that we may have. And they're exactly on budget at 67%, because again, we're at 66% of the year. And fire is 8.3 million allocated. They've expended about 4.2, so they're under a bit at 51%. EMS, same thing, 3.8, they're at 2.1, so they're 57. Waste collection is always an issue. They have a lot of injuries, workers' comp claims, a lot of call-offs, and so they're always a little higher than they should be. And then street construction, also the same at about $1 million, and they're at 72%, because this is the time of year when they actually do use their overtime. So they'll level out a bit as it gets a little colder and they're out of the street resurfacing business. The next page is just the consent decree. And I give you all of their allocations since we've been in consent decree, and they are scheduled to come in under target. You'll remember that they had a 5-year allocation, and it does not look to us that they're going to exceed it. When they do decide whether or not we've met the mandates of consent decree, which at this point, it looks like we may be in for another 2 years as opposed to another 5 is the general sense. We don't know that yet. And then we'll receive a 2-year budget if in fact that becomes what happens at the federal court level. The next page, of course, speaks to one of our areas that is the most important, which is income tax. Income tax, you can see, is currently through the end of October is at 59.48%. And again, we're at 66% of the year. Our income tax is currently running about 2.5% under. And that has to do, of course, with our contributing sectors to our tax base. And of course, we are the home of the great Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital and Metro Hospital. We have a large education sector, a large public sector, but where we're ailing and hurting, of course, is our small businesses. And we all know that the small businesses are the fiber of our local economy. So it is not something that we can weather lightly. So we are seeing some substantial loss there. And we expect that by the end of the year, that 2.5% may turn into 5 to 6% loss on our projection for income tax, which is withholding our individual income tax and net profits for the year. And again, I spoke on property taxes. They've been coming in as anticipated. We've not seen a decline on property taxes, even though I'm sure that we'll see some payment plans come into effect as people lose their jobs and have some difficulty meeting their property tax obligations. But as it relates to our commercial industrial base, it appears that those funds are coming in as projected. And again, we are 7 to 9% under because of the extended date. Okay. And then the next one is just the vacancy report. And I gave you that through page 13. So it just speaks to the number of vacancies. And again, we're operating at between 84 and 86%. And that's to accommodate for the loss of revenue on the revenue side. And we're only hiring critical positions. We've been doing that since March, which has helped us to manage where we are. And so that kind of concludes my report, as the council president told me to be as clear as I could be. So that's as clear as I can be. We are adversely impacted, again, as it relates to hospitality and our small businesses, which is very troubling. We continue to be challenged at the state level about income tax payments and who should be the recipient of those. And we continue to have some adverse impact on the loss of our sports teams and concerts and museums and the momentum, and the same thing that's happening in every urban kind of cosmopolitan area. Having said that, I'll answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I just wanted to just confirm a couple numbers, make sure I saw them properly or understand them. So the unencumbered cash that we brought forward in the budget that we passed, we've consumed about 10 million of that. Is that accurate?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay. And what do we think that'll look like for the rest of the year?
Well, in our first, Mr. Chair and members of the body, we were a recipient of stimulus funds, which would allow me to recover some of the costs that we've incurred for COVID-related kind of activities, which includes not only personnel devoted to COVID activity, but also PPE and the reconfiguration of our buildings for safety of employees, the 6 feet and the plexiglass and all the other things that we do, the sanitization and all of that stuff. And so that amount that we received in the first stimulus package was about 31 million. That amount is not reflected yet in this general fund. I drew down, we have the dollars, but I want to make sure that my reporting is correct before I move them into general fund. So in September, we'll be moving in about 12 million, but also in September, I'm going to have 3 pay periods. By the end of the year, we anticipate that our unencumbered cash will be someplace around 27 million.
Okay. And for the airport, it showed an increase, and then you mentioned that they were a recipient of the PPP. I guess my question is, it looked like that was keeping them healthy, but my understanding is that that's going to burn off in September, and some of the airlines, or at least United, I don't know what the others, have done their warn letters indicating they're going to begin layoffs October 1. Do we anticipate that being a big trend, or what do we anticipate for the remainder of the year?
Mr. Chair, what you have heard and what you've observed is exactly correct. The airline industry in and of itself is in a dire strait. Of course, we're hoping for some recovery in 2021, but all of the airlines in terms of their bond ratings and ability to refinance have been, downgraded and have a negative outlook because, passengers, of course, the flying industry in and of itself has declined. And yes, we expect that they will continue to decline. And yes, airlines are having massive layoffs. We're currently looking at their debt portfolio and what we may be able to refinance. They have a $45 million payment that's due in 2021 on their debt service. And so we're looking to restructure that and maybe push that out a bit. Yes, they are encountering some very dire financial straits.
And should we be concerned about October 1? Is that, are there other employers, maybe not just at the airport, but generally where PPP is going to be burned off, that October 1 is going to be a different calculation for a lot of our employers?
Mr. Chair, I've not received any notification, warn or otherwise, or from our people that interact with the business community out of taxation, that our businesses are looking at a decline. Now, having said that, some of the businesses have weathered this for 6 to 7 months. I think that, yes, we're going to see some additional impact for the last quarter of 2020, and I believe the first quarter of 2021, if the economy does not open and start to gain some momentum. Now, in terms of being notified by entities that that's their plan, we've not received any notifications, but that's generally the sense that this will continue to decline before it gets better. And possibly, we're hoping spring, it starts to get better in that it's open and there's economic momentum.
Great, thank you. And I have had the luxury of being able to, I've had frequent conversations with the chief on this, but I just thought it was very important that we all have real-time information on what's happening. But that's all of my questions. I want to go to Councilman Matt Zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question and a brief comment. My comment, I just want to make sure people are clear with the consent decree. As Chief Dumas said, we are required to be in it for a minimum of 5 years, and it's good to see through the chair to the chief that we're running below that projected $30 million figure. But after that 5 year, we have to demonstrate 2 consecutive years of compliancy prior to Judge Solomon Oliver releasing us from that obligation. So we will be involved for another 2 full years minimally with this decree and to bring it into compliancy. I do want to just second what the chief said about the work that we're making there. We're seeing significant compliancy on a number of fronts. There's some areas that we need improvement, but just know that as we do projections and budgeting for 21 and 22, there will be a placeholder for the consent decrees. Is that accurate through the chair to the chief?
That is correct.
Okay. And then through the chair to Chief Dumas, surprisingly, we're doing well, quite honestly, with police, fire, and EMS. I did not know that the year-to-dates overtime was in the status where they're at. So it looks like in at least two of the divisions will fall well below than what we budgeted. Just for those viewing, I mean, those are dollars that aren't allocated to the department. They get returned back then to the general fund. Chief, anything you want to comment on that?
No, Mr. Chair, you are correct. They have been performing very well in terms of overtime. And that has allowed us to do some of the things that we needed to do by way of PPE, sanitizing buildings and reconfiguring buildings, and some of the COVID related costs that we've incurred, the mask and the things that we've had to do for COVID. And they've some of their compliance and coming in under numbers also offset some of the loss of revenue that we've had, and we didn't have to compensate for that. So yes, they've been very compliant.
Thank you, Chief Dumas. That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Zone. Councilman Brian Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to Chief Dumas, do we know when the mayor would expect to lift the hiring freeze? And I'm only looking at Division of Waste, which seems to be well over their overtime budget, but yet 40 employees down. So do we know if, in fact, we could at least lift the hiring freeze on the Division of Waste, which obviously is in dire need of some help, or do we know when the mayor's going to lift the hiring freeze in general?
So here's how the hiring freeze works. When we go through cabinet and we have conversations with the divisions and departments and their operational needs, the freeze is flexible for operational needs. So anybody who's critical that, collects revenue, like works out of taxation, or somebody like that, waste collection, where we see a number of employees are down, we do then allow X amount of employees, whatever the department, division, commissioner, or director indicates that they need. And the Division of Waste is in process of replacing some of their employees that have either retired or off of the roll for injuries or things like that. So they do have open PRs, personnel requests, that we've approved for the replacement of those individuals.
All right, so they're at least looking at filling some of those 40 people that they're down.
That's
And
correct.
it's been okayed by finance and the mayor for them to hire.
That is correct.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Councilman Casey. Councilman Tony Brancatelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick follow-up on the county property tax. Director, have you received the latest delinquency report for our real estate taxes? And do we know what that percentage is right now?
I have not received that report as of yet, but they are reporting, Councilman, a collection rate similar to last year. So they're not reporting large delinquencies, and the dollars that we're receiving are not reflecting large delinquencies. My estimate is that some residential property taxes will be extended on payment plans because those are the individuals that are kind of losing their jobs. But on commercial industrial, I don't see any decline in the collection rate from 2019.
Okay, yeah, I'll reach out to the county as well. My concern on this broader proposed eviction freeze through the end of the year on the federal side worries a lot of us in terms of what the downfall is going to be when it comes to the residential side. So we'll pay close attention to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Brancatelli. Are there any other questions for Chief Dumas on the budget through August 2020? Hearing
Mr.
none,
Chair, I'm
Yes,
sorry, I had my hand raised. I'm sorry if it was
just thought,
not.
sorry. Councilman McCormick.
Thank you so much. Chief, thank you for this presentation. It was really helpful, and appreciate your diligence and your team's diligence during this time. Um, Chair to the Chief, I'm curious about and just the work from home aspect of what COVID has done specifically to healthcare in Cleveland. One of the conversations I was in over the past week is to whether things like telehealth and how that could impact our tax base here in Cleveland. And what I mean by that is, could a major institution, let's say, have servers in a suburb and be shifting it to a ton of telehealth, and then the city of Cleveland losing that tax base? So is that something that's come across your radar? Is it on the radar of the city? And can you speak a little bit more to those kind of little bit long-term, but obviously critical things to get our head around today?
Yes, Councilman, of course, there are always numerous creative challenges to some kind of taking away the tax base and kind of deflecting it to kind of other areas. We have those challenges all the time from at the state level and from other communities. I believe that if the teleworking or telecommuting and working becomes a trend that's a permanent trend, that there will be some things that will have to be addressed. And I think there will probably be vast things that will have to be addressed. I have not heard a concern around telehealth and telehealth kind of appointments and commuting. And as you said, making that available in servers in different suburban areas, and then kind of questioning whether or not the tax base of the doctor on the screen of the computer giving telehealth or medical visits to somebody over the computer relieves them of an income tax liability in the city of Cleveland. I've not heard that one as of yet. I don't discount that anything could happen over a longer term, but the one that's the most prominent now is the physical person working from their home and belong to a corporate entity that's in downtown Cleveland and in our greater Cleveland area. And as you well know, in the stay-at-home order, when we were directed that people had to stay at home and work from home, there's language in that order that says that the tax base of the corporate home is who receives that dollars. And so we have not been impacted by that yet, but yes, there are challenges to that. And yes, it's a concern. It's very much a concern for me.
I'm sure it is. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, given how you've said over time, and we all know that healthcare is so important, I wanted to flag that one for you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Councilman McCormick. Councilman Kevin Conwell. Councilman, you froze up. You still with us? I'm going to give him 1 minute because he's our last questioner. Councilman, you with us?
Can you hear me, Mr. President?
Yes. Yeah, now we've got you.
Okay, great. Because you know how it is around my house with this virtual. I have many trees around it. Through the chair to Director Dumas, can you reiterate what you mentioned about people retiring from the city of Cleveland? Because it went in and out on the on my.
Okay, so what I had said.
Yeah, I think we got the question, Kev. Councilman, you're cutting in and out. Director, if you.
So, Councilman, what's happened? It's not just at the city of Cleveland, but of course, I was speaking of the city of Cleveland. One of the COVID kind of offshoots is that individuals who have the ability to retire are electing retirement over kind of this current work environment that we're in now. And so we are seeing in the city an elevated level of retirement, particularly among the safety forces. There are more of them retiring than is our normal pace. And that's what I was reflecting when I said that, I was talking about healthcare benefits. And generally when people plan retirement, they're going into a kind of maybe less Hollywood type coverage. And so they really try to get most of their things looked at here. And so we see a little bit of a spike in our August numbers as it relates to healthcare because we pay our own claims. That's what I was referring to.
Okay, thank you, because it went out on my computer when you were narrating that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. I do not see any other hands. So with that, I would like to thank Chief Dumas for this update and just encourage all of our colleagues to keep a really close eye on this budget,
Please.
especially, you know, as we go towards the end of the year and into next year. It's going to be a different year.
Yes.
So Director, thank you very much. Much appreciated, and appreciate the reports that we get from you.
Thank you.
Okay. The second part of the agenda is really just, like I said, it's a report out. We had asked Project Group to facilitate a phase 1 study of whether, you know, solar was a feasible option for the city of Cleveland, and we focused on ground cover. So what I'd like to do is turn the floor over to John, and I know that you've got some guests that will be adding some context to what we're talking about. A lot of this stuff is kind of technical and engineering type terms. I'd like to get as broad an understanding as possible so people just kind of understand, you know, what is feasible and what were the major takeaways of the study. So John, to you. If you could unmute. Wait, I'm going to mute you from our end. There you go, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the committee, through the chair, about this time last year, Council President Kelly authorized us to undertake what amounts to a feasibility study to determine whether or not solar energy would work in Cleveland. We were fortunate, very fortunate, to have one of the region's premier solar engineering firms actually here in downtown Cleveland, 1925 St. Clair, and their name is Yellow Light. And we worked with them and have worked with them for the past year. I'll be introducing Azam Kazmi from Yellow Light after I make a few remarks about what we did and some of our findings. So we limited after talking through with the council president, we limited our investigation to carports and ground mounted arrays. And as he said earlier, the administration has investigated almost on a parallel track the opportunities in the city for rooftop mounted arrays. So we started out with, we were going to look at municipally owned sites, and we started out with 220 sites, and eventually narrowed that to 20 of the more promising sites. And through a set of let's say filters having to do with the size of the site, the annual daylight for each site, the electricity each array could produce, what we call the levelized cost of energy. And our initial calculations suggest that there is adequate daylight to generate significant amounts of electricity here in Northeastern Ohio. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Azam, who is the, I think, Chief Executive Officer of Yellow Light and one of the primary owners of the company. We work with Azam, and then he'll turn it over to Fida Aziz. I also want to note the presence of Al Fraz, who's also with Yellow Light. And we have worked very, very closely with these folks over the last year. So with no further ado, Azam.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, President Kelly, and thank you, everyone, for inviting us on this call. I want to just talk a little bit about Yellow Light, what it does, how long it's been around in Cleveland, serving Cleveland area. We were established in 2008 when a country was going through recession and an energy crisis. We established the company because we wanted to give back to the community. Since there was an energy crisis, the gas prices were projected to go really high. We looked at energy sources that alternate energy sources that we can introduce to the community. So after some initial researches, we ran into solar. And what we found out, that reason why people don't adapt to solar is because there's a lack of knowledge about the product. There's a lack of installers in the area, and prices are just too high. So just kind of evaluating that, we realized that this is all something that we can provide coming from a business environment. So we went to work and we established Yellow Light, primarily serving, established in Northeast Ohio, permanently serving the whole entire state of Ohio. We are a minority-owned organization with a diverse staff and we work through our local resources to help out the community. If you have any questions specific to Yellow Light, I can definitely answer them for you.
Thank you. I again would like to thank the council president and the remaining council members for taking the time and opportunity here. I wanted to talk briefly, this is Fida Aziz, about the course of study on our main primary objectives. I believe John had already briefed you. We did do something in parallel where we were focused more on ground mount and carport installations. Through our course and initial efforts, we identified approximately 222 municipal properties and then worked to narrow down that list. We used metrics such as available square footage or area acreage, as well as points of interconnect or potential areas where a solar array could hook back into the grid in simplest language, and then provide multiple formats of either offsetting existing usage or creating the sale of new generated electricity back to the utility providers in those areas. From that 222 property site, that is not completely comprehensive, that was just the initial scan. We narrowed that list down further to about 60, and then finally settled on approximately 20 sites that we could do a prospective design. Yellow Light utilizes keen resources such as software modeling, engineering course study to create preliminary designs for each of these 20 sites, and then use some of those production analyses that we created to assign a rate of payback, and then potentially model a sample project. If you could reference in the report that John was so kind to put together, Figure 1 does provide a keen summary of those final 20 sites that we narrowed down to. The report is comprehensive and it does go through the methodology that we chose. Some of the team members that we utilize, as well as softwares, helped us dissect also the point of how we would either install an array that would create new energy for sale, or again, be behind a meter in simplest language to offset some of the existing usage at certain facilities or certain areas. I'm also available for more detailed questioning on the methodology, as well as the specifics on some of the technical aspects of this project and design. I do want to turn the mic over to Al then to review some of the, or highlight a project or sample project that we had been working on, Burke Lakefront Airport, and the potential carport that could be incepted there at the facility parking area.
Thank you for that. This is Al Fraz, and you say I'm one of the senior members of the Yellow Light team, and have been involved in solar for about 14 and a half years, both before Yellow Light as well as with Yellow Light. One of the things that we did, and just overall, you may have questions about what made it on the chart and what didn't in the top 20. Solar basically has economies of scale, as well as an impact on the area that it's putting in. It's a modest impact compared to a lot of other forms of energy, but we tried to avoid obviously taking any land area that was already occupied for other uses such as parkland and so on, ball fields and whatever. So what came out of the study, you'll see in that chart that that are referenced, is primarily we're looking at parking lot areas with various facilities. Whether that was a city garage or one of the rec centers or whatever, the parking lots were the major area, because those areas we can put solar over the top of the parking lot and not disturb the primary use of the site that's already been providing some services to the city residents. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing, as you get involved with solar, is when you do parking lots, the orientation of the lot and the shape of it and stuff has a factor on cost too. So if you look down through the charts, you'll see that there's some lots, where we've designed a bigger solar array, but it has a lower cost than another one, which maybe is different sized or whatever. And it has to do with the orientation and the way that parking lot is laid out. Again, we weren't changing any structure of the land underneath it or anything like that. So it's always better to have double rows of carport canopies to make the array more efficient, and as opposed to single rows or single cars and around the outside edges and so on. So that's part of the difference. So the one I just was going to drill down a little bit is a fairly large one that everybody's familiar with, is Burke Lakefront Airport. Of course, has a lot of parking space there for people as they take a flight and leave their cars over some period of time, whether that's a day or weeks. And so we were able to fit quite a large array there. And because of that, that has a fairly attractive return on the investment there. Should you decide to go proceed with something like that, because we can get quite a bit of solar there. And the other thing I wanted to just say also is on the parking canopies, there's a lot of choices we can do when you decide to go forward here too. So we took just a first cut at this. When you design a carport canopies, we can do a lot of different things as far as the aesthetics of them and the structure, the finish of the steel and so on, and things like that too, as opposed to a traditional roof mount or a ground mount system that is fairly generic as far as the technology that we use. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. We did not do anything like put metal roof decks underneath the solar panels. So these solar arrays that would be on a parking lot are 100% waterproof, but they would provide shade, and they would keep majority of snow off of vehicles and the majority of the rain off of the vehicles, but they would drip as well. The way we've got now, it's relatively straightforward to put a metal roof deck underneath, but that creates additional costs as well too. So any questions at this point? I guess maybe turn it over to the committee here and the president if you have any questions or anything.
Thank you very much. That's very informative. And John, if you have on your desktop the summary of the report, would you re-forward that to me so I know you sent it to me, but I really would like everybody, I should have done that, and I apologize for not having that in people's hands before today, because it's very informative and it really kind of simplifies, where sites are. It really demonstrates the work that went into that. So as soon as I get that, I will forward that around. And Jason is not going to be with us. He got another call, but he was mostly going to observe. So with that, I'm going to go to Councilman Tony Brancatelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, was to get a copy of that report. And just want a quick comment. Al must have a great solar panel behind him, because that plant's doing great behind him. So I understand in the initial offering, we're looking at a number of the different city locations between the airport, et cetera. One of the questions that came up at the last CPP meeting was looking at landfills. I know through the last iteration of ward boundaries, I have 4 landfills now, and have been working with the County Land Bank and Private Institute about these large landfills as potential locations. Was any of that in the mix, or is that wasn't in consideration just given the way the study rolled out? And I'm not sure whether that's John or Al or who might look at that.
Mr. Brancatelli, through the chair, what we decided to do is all of these questions would come to me, and then I'll farm them out. So I would think either Al or Fitta would respond to that. So I'll leave it up to them. And Mr. Chairman, I did find that summary report, and I will be emailing it to you right now.
Great. I'll be watching for it. Thank you.
Peter, you want to go ahead with that?
You have the expertise. I mean, working
Okay,
with.
all right. Either way, all right. Well, as far as landfills, we did not do a lot of work on the landfills themselves. You can put solar on a landfill. The biggest issues get involved with is typically you want a landfill. Obviously, it's not in use anymore, and that has been capped. And because they're capped, and you do not want to make a penetration in that like you typically would on just an open field ground mount, we use what's called a ballasted mount system, which means we hold the solar panels in place with weighted blocks and so on. That does add a little bit more expense, but it does work. I personally been involved. For example, we did a project down for the city in Newark over a land capped landfill area, and Cuyahoga County has done one that you may have heard about in Brooklyn. Okay, that is a fairly large array that was done there too. It can be done. It does cost more than an open field. And the other thing I wanted to comment on the same thing with the carports. The steel on a carport canopy costs more than the solar panels, but you get the extra use of putting it over space that otherwise, you wouldn't. You would have to dedicate to solar. You're getting a dual use of being able to park under it and getting some coverage. So landfills, we can do that, but we didn't do a lot of work on it in this study.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just a second, what Al was saying, again, we tried keeping parameters simple in this pass. It is possible, in short, but effective measures for return or modeling a sample project or with useful life for the city of Cleveland was a focus, without, I guess, adding too many complexities at this stage. But we can address that and provide more information, feedback moving forward.
Thank you. All 4 of these landfills are capped, and they're all within the CPP as a user, and are near industrial complexes. So it really, finding roll-off would be ideal on most of these locations. So I'll work with John and go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Brancatelli, there's another consideration here. Have you, Mr. Chairman, have you received that yet?
Yes, I just sent it around.
Okay, if everybody would look at that report and look at figure 1, which is after page 4 in that report, that's a very summarized version of the report, which is several hundred pages long. And we have, for the 20 sites that we eventually selected, we have preliminary designs for every one of them and preliminary economics for every one of them. And that's all in the larger report, which is well over 100 megabytes because of all of the design work and things like that. But if you have figure 1 in front of you, one of the things that at this point right now, and I want to stress it's at this point right now, we also were looking at sites that are what we call behind the meter. So if you look at Burke, for example, Burke has an electricity load that can hopefully be offset by power that we generate on site. In other words, we don't want to go on at this point, we don't want to go onto the grid because of the problems that have developed with the Brooklyn solar array on the former site there, where First Energy has sued Cleveland Public Power. So most of these, almost all of these, are behind the grid. So if you look at Burke, it has to purchase power off the grid to run its operations. And if we can generate some on site, we can then hopefully save costs for Burke. Same thing. Let's just take Estabrook in the council president's ward. Same idea. They have to purchase purchase power off the grid. Might be supplied by CPP, might be supplied by First Energy. But if we can generate it on site and stay behind, at this point right now, not worry about getting onto the grid, and given the relationship between First Energy and CPP, that was another one of our considerations, and frankly, a pretty significant one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I understand it, whether, we could look whether it's a virtual net meter or a net meter, but if you have an off taker and you have a utility company and you're in an industrial area, I think you can capitalize that. I think that the opportunities are there when we're looking at these near industrial sites. And if if we have a power purchase agreement in place, all the better that we can, I think, find an investor. And if it's certainly the land bank as a developer and working with a partner, there's again, this is just, there's a lot of options here. So.
All right, thank you, Councilman. Councilman, and again, everybody should have the attachment again. Please accept my apology for not having it before we started. It's a 10-page quick read with a lot of pictures, so it really summarizes well what is feasible. Councilman Brian Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks for sending this over, but I'm just skimming through it right now, so I haven't had time to read the whole document. Just a quick question, Mr. President, to John. What happens, or how would this affect CPP financially if CPP is providing power to one of these entities that the city owns, and then we decide that we're going to go solar there? Is this a capital loss to CPP? Does CPP lose revenue by buildings in the city going solar?
Well, that would be part of Mr. Casey, through the chair. That would be part of our considerations here, because some of these facilities are served by CPP and some of them are served by First Energy. So there is a not only a financial but a small p political issue that would have to be addressed. Would Al or FIDA have any examples that would address Mr. Casey's, Councilman Casey's question?
Yeah, Councilman Casey, through the chair. The amount of power that we're talking about producing would have an impact on some of these larger ones if it was a CPP, but it also helps CPP because the time of day that the solar system is producing the most power is the time of day that there's the biggest demand on the grid and for CPP to produce power. So we're essentially relieving some of the congestion on the grid and taking some of that demand off of them. They are going to lose some billable, kilowatt hours at that particular site, but they also could avoid having to do infrastructure upgrade in some of the transmission lines and so on that otherwise would be required to continue to, as demand grows over time with the use of electricity. So it's if we did the whole city, yes, it would make a major, or if we did 25% of the city's overall usage, it would make a large demand. But I think in this scenario, that with the size of systems we have and the overall size of the city of Cleveland and the territory that CPP serves, it would be a very tough to even measure much of it.
And just to add to that, it's more or less a blip. What we've seen in our experience and practice is that we're typically supplementing the grid or offering support to the grid. I don't feel that we're adding more demand or reducing that type of initial overlay from the utility right from the get-go. So to second what Al said, I mean, it's more or less in support of or measures that supplement the existing utility service.
All right.
The other thing that I think is going to happen, just as a general comment, and not to go too deep in it, but there's a major movement now going forward here to increase the utilization of electric vehicles, and all the industry people are projecting a major growth in electric vehicle deployment over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to increase quite a bit of electric demand. And this is a vehicle to actually provide some of that extra power without having again to go off and upgrade the transmission and distribution grids, and as well as CPP having to go off and buy more grid on the from PJM and so on.
Thank you, Councilman.
And again, I'm assuming, Council President, that we're in the very infancy stage of this whole thing, seeing how we just got the report and everything. But in a nutshell, is this basically if this comes to light and goes online, is this basically a third utility that would be providing power to the city?
I'm sorry, Mr. Casey? Is this,
I mean, could this technically be yet a third utility that's providing electricity to the city of Cleveland? We have CPP, we have First Energy, and then we would have solar. Is this an offset, or would this be something new coming in?
I would say we don't know.
Okay. And again, that's why I said we're in the infancy stage
Yeah.
of the whole thing.
This is just feasibility. Would this stuff work? And I suspect we'll wait until we get some direction in terms of the findings of the administration's study on rooftop solar, and just see if is there a, I don't know this for sure. My guess is it would, if it proved to be feasible, would be some sort of small pilot project moving forward. But right now we're just in the feasibility phase.
Okay. All right.
And my understanding on this is you need a interconnection agreement with the utility company. So it's going to be either CPP or CEI.
Okay. All right. Maybe the question was a little premature, but I'm just trying to look at the big
Think
picture.
ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Matt Zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Zayek and the other presenters, it's exciting that we have the ability, particularly if the findings from the administration's report and our report really show that we need to ramp this up. With the local supply chain that's in our region, we have the ability to really jumpstart this market here locally. And so I'm excited to see where next phase goes. I often tell people when we talk energy, we as consumers are looking for more and more of it all the time. And you're not getting that predictability off of the grid. The grid is so volatile. And if we can get to a point where we can produce clean, carbon-free energy and have the ability to put it into what hopefully this would partner and wouldn't hurt CPP's bottom line, which I don't think it will, would be complementary, particularly as Alan, is it your last name, Fraz? I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce it, Fraz, said, on any given day, particularly in a peak period, CPP needs about 360 to 370 megawatts of power. So what would be, have you done any early projections? Because I haven't read the report yet on what a potential phase 1 solar array might actually produce in, are we talking kilowatts? Are we talking a megawatt? What are we talking of for a potential phase 1?
well, Mr. Zone, through the chair, let me address your first issue. right now in California, there have been rolling blackouts because of all the wildfires. And one of the things that is emerging as we move forward on solar energy and wind energy for that matter, is there is a complementary technical advance required because of battery storage. And they are in California right now. One of the reasons they got into the mess that they got into over the last month, aside from the wildfires, but with the rolling blackouts and the like, is because they didn't have enough power. If they could tap current battery installations for power that is being stored, that could go to alleviate other demand or other things going offline. So and that is happening as we speak. It's just they've just developed that capability in the last. Nobody thought about it before, and we're talking about just in the last month, last couple of weeks. They're tapping large, privately owned battery storage installations, and it seems to be working. As far as your second issue, I guess either Al or Fitta would take that on. The issue about how much, are you asking how much we could generate?
Through the chair to the presenters, yeah, I mean, if we're, based upon this report, looking to get large tracts of solar array, what would a phase one look like? Are we talking 500 kilowatts? Are we talking a megawatt? Just trying to compare.
Well, Mr. Chairman, to the
and I know, and I realize it's all predicated upon subscriptions and people buying contracts and supplying. I get all that, but I don't know if you've done any calculations as to what that might look like.
Yep. If you look at figure one,
I don't have the report in front of me. I'm on my computer. I can't be on the Zoom call and read the report at the same time. So I'm going to read it later. So I'm relying to hear what you have to say.
For every one of these 20 sites, we have identified, at least preliminarily, the size of the arrays, the array type, the construction costs, the cost per watt that we're generating, and then the cost per, that would be direct current, and then the actual usable one where we're estimating the cost. So we have done a lot of that work. I don't know that we've aggregated anything at this point among these, but that would be simple enough. I guess, Al or Fitta, you want to?
Yeah, to Mr. Chair, to the President, and again, I'm just a quick remark here. The range of size of arrays that we've looked at in this preliminary feasibility study are as small as about 150 kilowatts, but range all the way up to about 1.5 megawatts. Burke Lakefront specifically is about 1.66 megawatt array that we're considering. So we have included for you all an assessment in detail that shows a wide range of sizes.
Great. So Fitta, through the chair to the presenters, that's exactly kind of the response I was looking for. Just knowing that in our peak period, our greatest need for power CPP, somewhere is 360 to 370 megawatts. So we're talking just a fraction of what they need. As we know that more and more blackouts have occurred recently with CPP because of older infrastructure for really, this actually would free up their ability to actually expand more of a footprint in the city of Cleveland, have more predictable energy. The other thing it would do too is it would, we would get credits with our advanced energy portfolio standard that City Council adopted back in 2008, because we can't get enough renewables with just run of the river hydro and whether it's the LEED Co project or other solar. We can't meet our advanced energy portfolio standard without having a blend of solar. And so that's why this is critically important that this become part of our energy portfolio moving forward. I haven't made up any mind whether I think this is good for CPP or it should partner and do the interconnect with the other competitor. Although my bias and preference is always to make it a partner with CPP and make that a stronger, more viable entity. But I'm glad that we're proceeding down this path. I will read the report, and I'm sure I'll have many more questions to ask. But I just did want to relate kind of some of the unique things that this council has legislated prior that we have to work and really push the administration towards fulfilling our obligation. By 2025, we're going to need 25% of our energy portfolio come from renewables. I can tell you right now, 25% of 360 megawatts is not coming from renewables. So we have a lot of work to do in this space. And I appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Zone. Councilman Tony Brancatelli?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick follow-ups. John, you mentioned there was some hiccups or some issues at the Brooklyn site.
Excuse me, Mr. Brancatelli, to the councilman, or Mr. Kelly, to the councilman. There's a lawsuit.
Oh, that's okay. So it's a lawsuit around the CPP and CEI, not relative to the facility itself.
Correct. It's CEI is claiming that
The project works.
Okay,
the project works. Yes.
Okay.
There's issues about easements and CPP crossing easements and the like, and that's what the lawsuit's about.
All right, because I was looking at some of the other bigger ones, the Hillcrest one in Brown County, Willowbrook in Highland, and I think was it the Highland County Solar Farm? Or was it, there was a number of these that were referenced in some previous reports as being, some of the larger ones, and so that's what I was looking at, these larger land masses, and I'm not sure whether this can be answered or not, but whether or not how HB6 impacts any of these, because HB6 had a little carve out for investment on some of these solar farms, and if there's any question around whether or not that HB6 gets rolled back and what does that impact, and I don't know if you can answer that, John, or not.
Well, Mr. Brancatelli, through the chair, let me give you just a kind of an offhand response. You may know that I went to school at Ohio Northern in Hardin County, which is arguably the most conservative county in the state. They now have the largest solar farm and wind farm east of the Mississippi in Hardin County. The first and second largest wind farms and solar farms east of the Mississippi in the United States. So this stuff is very feasible, and it's coming very hard and fast. When we went to Northern, we always used to joke about how flat it was and how windy it was. Well, those are perfect conditions for wind and solar. And this stuff is going on right now. One of my closest buddies, who I think you've met, Ron Wiss, who's a farmer,
yes.
One of his pieces of property is one of those solar farms, and it's going to come online in December. So this is real. This is happening now. 18%, as of a couple of years ago, 18% of the power requirements of Ohio Northern University were from renewables. They have their own turbines and solar arrays on the campus of Ohio Northern, and that was a couple of years ago. That's going nowhere but up.
Okay, and again, I haven't been able to get to the report yet, but under this report, are we looking at Yellow Light as a membership investor, or is this just a study period?
Just a study. There's nothing beyond the study at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, and thank all of our presenters. And please accept
Council
my.
President, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Councilman
Yeah, no,
Mooney.
I texted you. I have a couple questions about this. I was reading the study. We didn't have it before. So there's a series of them. You have it broken down to cost per AC versus DC. Why is that? Just if you can give me a brief answer.
Mr. Councilman, through the chair, Al, you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Councilman Mooney, through the chair. What we gave is two, and I want to clarify that a little bit, because in the solar industry, we talk a lot about price per watt sometimes, and that usually refers to the cost, the construction cost, based on a size of system, and the size of the system is usually rated in the DC wattage, and it's really simple. It's basically if you had a 400 watt solar panel, or if you had let's pick 100 kilowatts overall, and it costs you $1 million, then it'd be dollar per, or $10 per watt, if you will. Basically, what we're doing is mixing apples and oranges here a little bit by cost. The DC is usually tied to the construction cost. The AC is what actually gets produced. And further, what we did on the AC is we provided what the effective cost per kilowatt hour is, as opposed to a watt. We're looking at what's a kilowatt hour over the 25-year life of the system. And the reason we did that is that's usually what you're looking at when you compare an energy cost to another energy cost. For example, what is CPP billing its customers today? What is CEI billing their customers? What can you buy power on the grid for? And that is quoted in dollars per kilowatt hour AC. Okay, and so that's why the two numbers, if that clarifies it for you.
No, it doesn't. But let me. But along those lines, I mean, so we'll take a look at just the red, the cost per kilowatt hour. Does that factor into it when you figure the cost of the construction, the cost of the yearly maintenance, and any other costs in maintaining it for whatever the life of the equipment is? Is that how you arrived at the cost per kilowatt hour?
Essentially, yes. Yeah, we took the construction costs and we subtracted available incentives that are out there on the federal and depreciation one. Because again, we figured most of the time, most municipalities do not outright buy the solar system and construct it themselves and own it themselves. They typically get a third-party investment group that will go out and build the solar array, and then that group maintains it and owns it, and then they sell the power back to the municipality, so the municipality doesn't have to put out any capital outlays, use any of their
so is that what you factored here? Was somebody else doing that?
That's what we did. We didn't get into what they cost. They would sell you the power for, but we tried to give you an idea of what they could potentially sell the power for, if you will, or less than this. Okay.
So you're talking about hiring another company to install it. They would own it, and we would just pay that amount for the electricity.
You would just like you would pay CPP or CEI, you would pay a third party. And typically most of these systems, you essentially have two electric bills. Then you would have your whatever power that's not covered by the solar system, you still buy from CPP or CEI. And in the middle of the night, the solar system is not going to produce any power, so you're buying that power from your utility company. And then when the solar system is operating, you're getting all that power that the solar system produces, and you're paying it at the rate that the third party that owns the solar array would sell it for. And almost in all cases, they're selling it at a lower rate than what the utility is charging for power.
Okay, so then just a follow-up looking at this, and I know you mentioned this, but I just want to explain to me. With each site, you have utility. Is that the utility that currently services that site, and that's what you would have to utilize if there's excess power you generated that more than what's being used on site? It would have to go back through that utility.
Yeah. What happens with the solar system is it's kind of a bell-shaped curve throughout the year. We have more sunlight, longer daylight hours in the middle of the year. And so you're getting more power covered in June, July than you are in December, January. Okay?
So we're not going to
January, you're using a lot more power from the utility company. In the summer months, you may be producing all your power from the solar company, or maybe you're getting 90% of it, whereas you're only getting 20 or 25% maybe in the winter months.
Okay, so then just another one question or two. So really, when we're looking at this, the city wouldn't incur any construction cost
That's
in
correct.
your model because you would just authorize a third party to do this. You're estimating that's their cost, and we would just, we'd have no cost at all for installing this.
That's
right?
correct. And that's what Cuyahoga County did. And that is what City of Cincinnati has been doing and other municipalities. That's what the city of Newark, I mentioned that one we did on a landfill down there. So they're owned by a third party entity, which then sells the power back, and you have typically a 20 or 25-year contract to buy the power from the solar system.
All right, but and then just my final question. Thanks. That this is all really helpful and interesting. But and again, this is just a study. That's that model, but nothing would prevent, for instance, if CPP wanted to move into this market, from them doing this service.
Not at all. And in fact, what we're seeing now in Ohio, and it's been happening all over the country, is the utility companies are investing in solar arrays themselves now, because solar is actually one of the lowest ways you can produce power, especially when you do larger solar arrays. It's lower cost than a coal-fired power plant. It's lower cost and way lower than a nuclear power plant. And it's actually even cheaper than a gas-fired power plant and so on. Okay, so solar is the cheapest. So all the new construction, a lot of the new construction that's going on for a new generation in the United States has been solar arrays and wind farms.
Well, and I'm sorry, one last question. Look at this. So this cost per, in the red, you have cost per AC kilowatt hour. That's the cost that you estimate would be for this third party from all their costs, maintenance, installation, construction. That's the cost. So that doesn't mean, obviously, they're not going to sell it to us at cost, because if it's a for-profit entity, they're going to want to make money, right?
Yeah,
that's just their production cost.
They're typically going to make somewhere between 10 and 15 points on that. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, what is the current cost per kilowatt hour, if anybody knows, CEI or CPP is charging right now? Just curious.
Well, it depends on what
for us, for the city as a customer.
Residential or commercial, there's a big difference. Okay, residential right now, you're typically looking at somewhere between 11 and 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, and
yeah,
commercial environment. What's that?
What is the city considered?
The city's rates, again, depending on the size of the usage and stuff too, it makes a difference. But you're looking at anywhere from 10.5 cents. Sometimes it goes down to 7 or 8.2 cents per kilowatt hour on a bigger site.
So overall, this is still a good deal in the study.
Oh yes, that's what I said. Yeah, solar is lower cost, and these prices appreciate too. These prices are higher typically, again too, because we're putting them in as a car canopy. Okay, and I mentioned this, the steel that holds the canopy structure is more than the solar panels. So if you look at, and again, all of you don't have the chart in front of you, but if you look at, for example, the Ridge Road transfer station, that was one of the few that was a large ground mount array. The cost for that one goes way down. If you notice that one,
it's 0.03 cents basically, roughly.
Yeah, right.
All right, no, these are all, thank you. This is all good baseline information, and of course then with a third party, any excess capacity, they would reap the profits from that, not the city, if it was done in this manner.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all of our guests and all of our colleagues for tuning in. This concludes Finance Committee. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.